As the host of Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast, I am delighted to be able to bring you this podcast. My name is Wendy Lopez, and I would like to introduce myself to you. I specialize in helping people overcome their emotional blocks through different techniques, through emotional empowerment coaching and compassionate healing life facilitation. As a mom who has experienced narcissistic trauma, I help moms eradicate self-doubt in order to regain self-confidence to elevate their status both at home and at work. In our podcast, we discuss people's struggles, triumphs, and failures. We dive deeper into self-love, self-compassion, self-acceptance, and mindful, holistic tips. In every episode, I hope that you can take a golden nugget of advice and apply it to the journey of motherhood in order to raise your level of awareness. Welcome to Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast, where you find healing and creative mental thought advice from experts on past pain, narcissistic experiences, and trauma. Today, I have our guest, Pauliana Lara. She teaches mom how to have it all, including balance and joy. With 2 decades of legal practice representing Fortune 500 companies and being a single super mom, Pauliana is an expert in obtaining and enjoying the both in life, knowing that valuable lessons come with the bumpy road and the stretching of oneself, both personally and professionally. As a high-level professional woman, she has learned she doesn't have to choose between her job and her kids. She can have both. It is her mission to equip other working moms with the tools to transform their lives. Pollyanna speaks to women around the globe and coaches them on how to navigate all the things, finding that sweet spot of a stability and joy in life. Now, Pauliana helps working moms fully have a work-life balance that offers fulfillment in the boardroom as well as the living room. Welcome, Pauliana. I'm so excited to have you on our show today, and I'm so grateful to have your expertise in helping moms, as we were speaking before we got on, working through shame and guilt and trauma of being a working mom. And as you...
Yeah. I always say this because it's true, and it almost seems like it's my opening line, but I'm so thrilled to be here because what we're getting ready to talk about, I think, is so important for your audience. It's so important for women to hear my story with the hope that it will improve their journey and it will give them some tools to better equip them, because it is a bumpy road. I believe very few working moms have it easy. I don't care what level you're at. I don't care what you do for a living. It's just the constant push-pull of career and home. I think it's a struggle for everybody. So I'm very excited to be here as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. And we're blessed to have you on here. And like you said, we're going to share some tips and how moms can either take action or take a golden nugget that you give or step away with something that they can apply with themselves. Being that working mom, I came from corporate America, corporate employee, corporate manager, into having my own spiritual business, spiritual practice that includes mind, body, and spirit. So you that actually helps moms do that transition, right? Can you speak to us about your experience on what that was, being a working mom? And you said you do litigation,
Correct.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
So
no stress
doing that,
at all.
I know that's what I'm saying. Doing that type of work, what were your experiences as coming up through trauma? Whether it was emotional, physical, spiritual?
I think we have to rewind the movie a little, Wendy, because, as young women who already know that they want to go out and be in the workforce and make a difference in the world, no matter what it is, whether it's nursing or, entrepreneurship, starting your own business, being a physician, an accountant, whatever it is, I think during your adolescence, you just think about the career part. So I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get an internship, and then I'm going to get this great job, and it's going to be wonderful. I don't think in your early 20s, you're thinking, well, what am I going to do when I have a family? Because our mind isn't, geared towards that path at that moment in life. So you do all the right things you need to do. You go and you, like I said, you get an education. If you need a master's degree or a certification, you go down that path. And then there you are doing your career, and life is great. You're accomplished. You're proud of yourself. You've attained your goal. And then for some women, they get married or they don't get married, and then they become mothers. And it literally is, the point of two worlds collide. You have your career and everything is great. And then now you're in this solely dependent relationship with another human being. And nobody trains you on that. There's no courses to take, or at least there wasn't when I was growing up. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom. So I didn't even have that concept of, how do I do this? Because I didn't live that. I never went to daycare. I never had a babysitter. I never had, carpools, because my mom did everything. So that was what my role model was. And so that was especially more difficult for me. Some of your audience members, or your listeners had a different experience. They had babysitters. They went to daycare. So in their mind, they knew that when the time came for them, those were the things they were going to have to do, because they too had to work. So I think it was especially difficult for me emotionally and mentally when I became a mother, because I literally didn't know how this was going to work. I remember, and I was very fortunate. I got to stay home for 6 months with my first child, and about the same with my second child too. The firm I was at was very supportive. But when I took my son to preschool, he was like 7 months old, I cried for the first 30 days. Every time I dropped him off, I cried for the first 30 days to the office. It was completely draining and painful, but I didn't have a choice. I had to go to work. I had to earn a living. And here's this baby. I couldn't, and I loved him obviously to death, every mother does, but I still remember, and I worked in a high rise, and we had underground parking. Wendy, I could see it. I could see it's burned into me. I would park my car and just sit and finish and clean my face and put on some makeup and, put on a smile and go upstairs and be this attorney that my firm, my clients, society expected of me. But I was broken inside. I hurt. I couldn't wait for it to be time for me to go home, to drive back home to get my child. So it was very, very challenging, and I didn't have any guidance. A lot of the coworkers, a lot of the people at the firm I worked with were older men, and they were great. They were very, again, supportive to the extent they knew how to be supportive. They weren't coming and saying, "Oh, it's okay, Pauliana, don't worry about daycare," because they were so past that, and they were never in that role. Their wives were doing the mothering. Their wives were doing the
It was different.
Exactly. And
total different roles.
Yeah. And I felt almost like I couldn't share what I was going through with them, because they literally couldn't relate. And so that first couple of years was very, very difficult.
Right. And I love what you said, because this is what we are helping women shift in their trauma, whether it's emotional, physical, spiritual, and being allowed to embrace motherhood, like you said in when I introduced you, out in the boardroom and in the living room. And there's such guilt for moms having to put their child in daycare, because that was also my experience. I had such guilt to do that I ended up not doing it. And I was fortunate enough to quit my job. What would you tell the moms that don't have that choice?
And thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for as many women to hear the message that the guilt or the shame, which we will touch on in a few minutes, is very normal. And there shouldn't be shame and guilt about feeling shame and guilt, because
Mm-hmm.
we're just human beings at the end of the day. I mean, I don't care if you're an attorney or a banker or whatever you are, and once you become a mother, it's almost like another person comes into your being, because now
Mm-hmm.
you feel different things and you want to do different things, and there's different expectations of you. So the guilt, Wendy, I still struggle with it. It's
Mm-hmm.
less, my kids are much older now. Obviously, they're both
Mm-hmm.
teenagers, but I still sometimes feel this push pull. But I've learned how to address it, and I've learned how to cope with it almost. So what I would tell your listeners is the guilt is very real, and it's going to be there,
Mm-hmm.
and it comes in a variety of forms. It's, am I going to miss the holiday sing along at third grade
Mm-hmm.
event? Am I going to be late to a ballet recital? Am I going to be
Mm-hmm.
able to take a day off and chaperone a field trip? I mean, these are all very real, constant, and bless these schools, they have activities all the time. All the time they have
Mm-hmm.
activities. And so the one thing is, make it a point. I made it a point to go to at least two things for each child each semester. I don't know if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
if it was, I remember they used to have a book fair at the cafeteria where each school would go and the kids would take their little
Mm-hmm.
dollars and buy a book. And the parents were invited to join. And
Mm-hmm.
I showed up one day for my daughter and I didn't tell her I was going to go. And I was waiting outside the cafeteria. Wendy, I remember it like it's, again, burned in.
Mm-hmm.
And her class walked up and she saw me. It was like, Mom, what are you doing here? And I was like, honey, I'm
Mm-hmm.
here at the book fair. I mean, she was so excited, and that made me feel so good. And it was just a simple 20-minute thing, but she was so accustomed to me not going to anything because I was
Mm-hmm.
always working. I mean, this little girl's face lit up. And that for me was so rewarding. It was such a mutually loving moment. She was so excited. I was so excited because she was so excited. So, you know, you can't go to everything, or at least I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't go to everything because I had to work. And sometimes it was in the morning, sometimes it was smack dab in the middle of the day. But I knew that I was going to at least do two things with her and two things with my son each semester, or whatever you will. And so I just worked it into my schedule. You can go to lunch
Mm-hmm.
early, or if it's a morning event, you can go a little late. But just that small break for 20 minutes really, really filled me for a very long time because I felt so good. There was no more guilt. Like, I went to the book fair with my daughter today. She got to hold my hand and walk through the cafeteria and look at the books and buy
Mm-hmm.
something. She went back to school. I drove back to the office, and I was able to detach so that that guilt wasn't because Wendy, if I was at the office, I'd be sitting there typing, thinking, all the other moms are at the book fair, and here I am. And whether you want to admit it or not, your focus, excuse me, you're distracted. My mind would have been at the book fair, and that wouldn't have been
That's
fair to,
true.
I know. I mean, that wouldn't have been fair to my
Mm-hmm.
client, to my firm, to me. But it was those little things that really enabled me to put the guilt aside
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't feel guilty anymore. I felt wonderful. I felt great that I was able to do that. And I think nowadays, especially post COVID, remote working, you know, not going in every day. I know a lot of people who are still working remotely. I think there's a lot more opportunity to do some activities with your children that will really fill your emotional, spiritual, mental cup, if you will. And then
Right.
that allows you to do the things that you need to do at work. So
Right.
I really think that. And um, performances. Both of my kids were athletes. I try to go to every game. I still do. I try to go to every single game. But another little tip is if you're there, you got to really be there. I used to be that mom that was like this on the phone and like, oh, go, honey, good job, because there was a client calling or I had to talk to a colleague. And I might as well have not been at the game because I wasn't there. And I decided it was almost overnight, I'm not doing that anymore because I'm not giving to my son and I'm not giving to the client. And that made me feel bad. So it was a lot of the personal choices we make about how we feel. And I decided, when I'm at work, I'm at work. Online shopping, finding cute, matching Christmas pajamas, all of that stuff, which are fun things to do for a mom, were nothing I needed to do for my lawyer job. And then the same thing, when I left the office, I left. I stopped checking emails, I stopped taking calls, and I was a mom. And I really feel my kids sense the difference. And I see the reward in it now that they're older. And it was very tough. I spoke at a Women's Bar Association event last year. And I got a call it was an email from the president on a Monday morning. And she said, I have to tell you, Pauliana, last night at our dinner, Sunday family dinner, I thought of your voice and I put my phone in the other room. And she said she enjoyed that dinner so much more. She said it was the simplest thing. And I got goosebumps one day. I was like, that's it. That's why I do this. That's why I do this, because it was the simplest, quickest thing. She said, just physically putting my phone in another room, and her children were young. I was able to enjoy that dinner. Nothing changed on the menu. Like, it was still the same food. It was still the same, her house, her kitchen. She said, but knowing that my dumb phone was somewhere else, I was really able to enjoy it and be engaged. And that's why I'm doing this. That's why you have me on here today, because it's the little things that make such a huge difference.
Right. So, and that's the great aspect of being a mom nowadays with technology, right? It's about being present, right? It's not just enough to show up, like you said, to the event and be on your phone trying to fix a quick something or be on email. That's not being present for your child. And so I love that your client was able to be recognized, being present for that dinner, putting whatever was diverting or distracting her attention and being present for her child or in her family.
I will say it's a conscious choice. You have to make that decision. And it's very tough. I mean, it's really a shift in mindset of like, I'm physically here, but if I'm not mentally here, what's the point? And so you have to decide if you're going to be at a recital, if you're going to be at an orchestra performance, baseball game, whatever, be there, because there's so much for you to benefit from it too. I mean, it's a two-way event. Again, your child looks in the stands or in the audience and says, hey, my parent is here, my mom is here, just like all the other moms. And you get to see a really cool performance that your child is participating in.
Right.
You're on the phone or you're checking email, it's like you're robbing yourself of that value too. And why would you do that? Because it's your child performing it. I mean, it's not like you're going to a movie theater, paying some multi-million-dollar actor. It's your child. So what a beautiful thing that you're not able to fully enjoy because you're on the phone or you're like. But it was still. I mean, that is true. It's a conscious choice, and it's like a habit almost. It takes constant practice and a reminder to get into that habit. But it's doable. I did it.
And you mentioned earlier about personal choice. When did you make that personal choice of being, working as an attorney? And you still do the work, but for you to help moms and do that aspect of it? Do you do that full-time, part-time? How did that happen?
how that happened is I came through on the other side. As the children got a little older and I started practicing the things that I was witnessing. This is literally my life story. I never got help from anybody. I didn't hire a coach. I didn't read a book, listen to a podcast, whatever. I just got sick of the push-pull. And I thought, okay, something has to change. I talk about how technology changed and now there was Bluetooth in the car, right? So you're driving and a call comes in and you can press a button and here you are talking to your client or your boss or a colleague in the car. Well, I used to take calls all the time in the car with 2 car seats and, on the screen, it would say a name, so-and-so, and I knew who that was. And the kids were having a blast on the back singing, Disney songs and like making weird sounds or whatever. And I'd always say, it's a work call. Like, why do they have to worry about that at 5:30 on a Tuesday when we're on our way home from daycare? And one day my son did it. I think my energy and my body language changed because we were singing whatever. And I turned the volume down and I was like looking to see what it said. And he said, "Shh, it's a work call." And I thought, oh my gosh, that hurt. That was like a pain for me. Like, my kids are even recognizing that they have to be quiet. And I remember the freeway I was on. I'm a visual person. And so some of these moments that are like burned into my memory is usually, emotionally high or an emotionally low point. And that was a low point for me where we have to stop singing, our Disney songs because mom has to talk to a client at 5:30 for something that was probably very insignificant. Nothing is happening at 5:30. No courts are open. And so, but it was that need that I had imposed upon myself that I have to be accessible to my clients because my male counterpart attorneys were accessible. And I wanted to be on equal footing with the men at my firm. And I thought, you know what, though? I'm not a man. I have 2 small children. And I feel horrible when my own son is saying, "Shh, it's a work call." And I'm not doing this anymore. And so that really was the moment that I was like, okay, I need to make some changes. So it was the simple things. No work calls. When I left the office, I left the office. But I'm type A. So when they went to bed, I would do I'm going to just check my email really quick. I don't like surprises. I have plenty of fires to put out during the day. And so if there was something that was either going to make me happy, like, oh, the hearing was continued or the client changed their mind, whatever. So it was either going to make me feel good about something or I had to start thinking, planning mode that something could change. And I think that's okay. But something interesting, I see young women attorneys sending me emails at like 1 a.m. And I'm like, I was that attorney because, you want to prove something and you want to get on a partner track and you want to show your boss or your company, your firm, your colleagues that you're just as dedicated. And it's really not my place to tell them, dear, you're not going to be doing this. You shouldn't be doing this when you become a mom because at 2 o'clock in the morning, you need to be resting. Because in 3 or 4 hours, those little faces are going to run in and you're going to have to make breakfast or change a diaper or do those things. But I see the same pattern because before I had kids, that was me. I wanted to work as much as I could and get that final thing done and send that email. I don't care that it was 1 or 2 in the morning, but life will force you to make these changes. So if anybody can hear this, and anybody can start already changing their mindset, I think they will have a much smoother transition into motherhood.
Right. And I love what you said about being in the same footing as the male, coworkers, partners, attorneys, right? And that goes into my world that I experienced. I was in medical management for 24 years, and I always wanted to fit into that male world. And that was including sacrificing motherhood.
Yeah.
Right. And so the beautiful thing, like you're saying, is we can have both. That's my experience.
I firmly believe that. It's a mindset shift, and you kind of have to take the emotional component out of it. You can no longer feel shame for the choices you are making.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to say that, but I believe that if you repeatedly hear that, it will start becoming an acceptable proposition, if you will. Like, I really struggled with shame. I didn't want to tell people that I was putting babies into preschool or daycare because I had to come to the office. But that was my reality. I had no choice. So I didn't need to be made to feel worse about it. And so it was like, you just kind of have to develop like the shield around your heart and your head. So when somebody at the office says, how are the kids doing? I'm like, oh, they're great. That's it. Not like, oh, it sucked. I have to drop them off at daycare and I cried all the way here, because then you're feeding into the guilt. Then you're opening the door for them to say things like, oh, isn't that a shame? Oh, those poor kids, you shouldn't be dropping them off at daycare. You should really be home. I don't need to hear that. I already know that.
Right.
I also know what my financial situation is. And it's not always the money. I always wanted to be an attorney ever since I was a little girl. And here I am living my professional dream, if you will. And I just have to make some adjustments, on the road, because I also wanted to be a mom. And I don't believe they're mutually exclusive, but man, it was tough when at first my worlds, I had two roads. But I think people aren't intentionally making you feel bad. It's just like the social commentary of, oh, they're so little. Oh, those poor babies. It's like, okay, I don't need to hear that from you. So you kind of can change the conversation and say, oh, the kids are doing great. They're growing and they're talking or walking, whatever it is, but not opening the door into the struggle, because sometimes people don't make you feel so good about it.
Right. That's so true. So allowing yourself to empower yourself with your decision instead of going into also, because there can be a conflict within the person, the mom, that she is having to put her children into daycare, but yet has to go to work. So there's like that conflict in the middle. What would you say about that?
All the time. But I think, again, the guilt, and I always say this, for me, shame is external. It's how somebody else makes you feel. Again, I'm not a therapist, a clinician. I have no license, no certification. I've never been into medical school, and I never have a desire. But, the shame guilt thing, I'm just speaking from what I experienced and from what I felt. Shame was what somebody else imposed on me. So the whole conversation of, oh, that's too bad the kids have to go to daycare, or, oh, they're so little, those poor babies. That made me feel shame. Guilt was only me in my own head. I felt guilty, eating if I the kids need to be fed on a certain schedule or whatever. But sometimes I hadn't had breakfast and I was so hungry. I just wanted to eat. And I would feel guilty eating without my kids. Like, who cares, Pauliana? Eat. If you don't eat, you're going to collapse, or you're going to have no energy. But the guilt was internal. Nobody knew whether I had eaten or not. It was, the guilt for me was the decisions. I was criticizing the decisions I was making, but shame for me was other people criticizing the decisions I was making. So I learned to kind of turn the shame off, almost like, I can't hear you, and dictating how the conversation would go. Guilt, it was a process. I had to literally take active steps and say, okay, if you're hungry, you need to eat. Don't feel guilty that you're eating without them. before them, away from them. You got to do the
Mhm.
things you got to do. There were times when I just felt like I was going to have a meltdown, and I would go into the garage and look for something for like 5 minutes because I just needed like,
5 minutes. Like I really need just 5 minutes.
I know, like I'm gonna go look for that thing that we don't have in the garage, but they didn't know that. But I needed it because I was my mind was just, imploding. And I think that's also important. I also talk about, how important mental health is. You got to find an outlet. Every human being does, and especially moms, and especially when they're little. Um, so, kind of bringing the trauma back in. Trauma can, for me, the majority of it was just mental. I was anguished. I was very, very guilt ridden for the decisions and the choices I had to make. And I didn't feel good about any of it. And then there are these two beautiful faces who knew nothing about what was happening in the world. I mean, they were just trying to still figure out what their toes were. And, I wasn't able to take in the beauty of those moments because there was so much going on here. And then, oh, that client, oh, I hope I paid the phone bill, all of that. And it was traumatic. And the objective is for other women to not get to a point, because sometimes the trauma is overbearing and it could lead to bad consequences. I know a young woman right now who is on her third child and completely detached. And it's very sad and it's very painful. And I'm trying to work through with her because she has so much on her plate. And the baby's like 8 months old. And she just she cannot have a relationship. And that's heartbreaking. And it's not anything intentional, but again, it's all of the emotions that she has to deal with in her heart and all the things that are going on in her head. And for some women, it's too much. And it's a very reasonable phenomenon. It gets to be too much. So if you don't find an outlet, or if you don't start working on incorporating tools and habits and routines, sometimes the trauma is severe. I mean, people give their children up.
That's
Have
true.
their children taken away. People, end up making very, very poor choices because their mind is so clouded. And so I do think the objective is to prevent the mental or the emotional trauma. And sometimes it is physical. When do we know that? I mean, fortunately, the majority of things I think we can take steps on to prevent, but sometimes the trauma is physical. And if, women don't find the right outlets, the consequences are just horrible.
Right. Yes. And that's what I love doing my podcast. And I do a summit as well to bring awareness that there is no, small trauma, big trauma, because it depends on how the person ingests what's going on, and they can stay looping in that. And you said something about that client being detached. That's what we learn, to detach ourselves so we can survive and pay our bills, take care of the family, because that's what we learned. And you mentioned about your mom. She was a stay-at-home mom, right? And so we see that, and then so we have this guilt that we need to put our kids in daycare, or they have to stay with someone else while you work, right? So there's a disconnect because of the guilt as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's all, like you said, external, because now we're getting shamed from how we're doing things. And then the internal part, we're feeling guilty. So that's not a very healthy recipe. So, yes, I agree with you with moms having outlets, whether it be a physical, whether you're going to the gym, whether you're listening to podcasts like this, to feed the mind, right? To feed the soul, that there is something greater that you're doing, but understanding where you are at.
And I think also when you so it's so great that you do this podcast, because you're giving women an amazing resource. And I think the best part of the resource is for other women to know that a lot of the things they're feeling are normal,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we want to know that there's nothing wrong with me, because 300 other women are feeling, saying, experiencing the same things that I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a bad mom. I shouldn't feel shame. I shouldn't feel guilt, because I'm looking around and I'm listening and I'm going to these events and I'm, reading blog posts or whatever it is doing, and learning that what I'm experiencing is very normal for working moms. But
Mm-hmm.
the beauty of it is there are also guidance and insight and tips and
Mm-hmm.
suggestions. And like I said, that one mom, the president of this bar association, just putting her phone in another room. It
Mm-hmm.
took 20 seconds, and it completely gave her a different experience at the dinner table.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you and I do this, because we
Mm-hmm.
want to help women make small little changes to get the best out of both worlds.
Right, right, right.
You know,
And it is my strong belief that the more you can self-care yourself and learn to really value yourself as a woman, as a mom, um, your children get that value and you're able to love yourself more and you can love your children more versus having resentment toward, because I went through that. I had resentment towards myself of that I was this bad mom because I had to work all the time. So I made a disconnect with my children. So if we can help, right, and with the tips and the tools, um, something can shift where there's an understanding that we're all in this together.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Hmm. I love that. So is there, before we close, is there any tips or anything else that you would want to say to the moms out there, as far as we talked about small trauma, big trauma, in between? Is there anything else that you would like to share with the moms?
Wendy, I could be here for 3 days.
I know. I know.
There's so much, but um one thing, actually, just a couple of things. Yes, there's a couple of things. One thing that I really, really struggled with, and it was dumb. I
Hmm.
had Wonder Woman complex. I
Hmm.
was going to do it all. I didn't need anybody to help me. I got this. And the truth is, I didn't. And I couldn't. But
God bless you.
dang, if anybody was going to tell me you can't do it all, because yes, I can.
Right.
And deep down, I was
Right.
like, crud, how am I going to do this? So ask for help. It's very
Hmm.
simple. The
Right.
thought of somebody giving my child a ride home when they were little was like, that was my scarlet letter. I got the Bad Mom of the Year award. They were going to have my poster in every elementary school saying, "Do not turn out to be like this woman." And school is like a mile away from home. But I would leave my office, drive like 90 miles an hour, probably get all sorts of moving violation opportunities.
Right. Getting there.
I wanted to pick up the kids from school. And it's like,
Mm,
who cared? They didn't even care.
that's interesting.
But it was in my head. Again, that was
Hmm.
my guilt. Like, all the other moms are going to pick up their kids. It has to be me. And then I was like, this is insane. I'm leaving work early. I'm, creating pure anxiety, let alone traffic hazards, because I want to be the person that they come into for a 1 mile drive home. And so the concept of getting help, asking somebody to do a drop off one day, asking somebody to do a
Hmm.
pickup one day, it blew my mind that I had to, again, change my mindset and think asking for
Hmm.
help is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of your inability, your inefficiency, or your lack of capability or love.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, get those kids home, get washed up, and sit and have a nice family dinner. That was the goal. Nobody cared how they got there. It was 1 mile.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a long time for me to realize that small little change would take so much of my mental struggle, all the, like, I was a ball of nerves. Like, I got to get to school. I got to get to school. And like, I'd get there and they were like eating corn puffs in the corner somewhere. Not even, it's not like they were waiting, crying at the window. Where's our mother? Where's our
Mm-hmm.
mother? They didn't even care. So asking for help is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Get
I
over
agree.
that complex, get over that Wonder Woman syndrome. It means nothing. If you ask for help, it means you're a good mom.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to judge
Right.
you. Nobody is going to think anything differently of you if you just say, look, I'm tied up in something. Can you do a drop off? Can you do a pickup? Or, for a long time, my kids went to after school. I had to. I mean, at first I hated it because I just wanted them home, but nobody was home. Like, where were they
Mm-hmm.
going to come to? It was easy for them to stay after school. They found friends. I mean, I had to just honestly, I had to pay for it, but it was worth it because then I
Right.
knew in my mind,
Right.
I'm I could sit at my desk and do everything I need to do. I'll leave at 4 o'clock or whatever I had to leave, drive at the speed limit,
Mm-hmm.
get to school, pick them up, go home, and then guess what? Work is done. Now it's mom. We're
Yes. Right.
coloring and eating and taking baths and reading and playing, and it felt great. So
Mm.
the one
Right.
thing I would really, really say is, ask for help, get over any complex you have. We touched on this a little bit, but mental health for moms is very, very high up on the list of important
Mm-hmm.
things. Because if you're not good up here, you know, your environment isn't healthy.
Right.
I see it, and I was that mom. When I was so stressed out and nervous and anxious, my tone was different, my body language was different, how I communicated with the kids was
Mm-hmm.
different because I looked at them as, I'm failing you. Sometimes I'm going to be honest. I looked at them and I'm like, I'm failing my clients.
Mm.
I'm failing my firm. And I really had to work on, you have to stop letting those thoughts in,
Right.
because I was oftentimes not in a good mental place until I started making that shift. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
get help for mental health too. I
Oh,
don't care.
I
Like you
love it.
said, if it's go on a walk, watch crappy TV,
Mm-hmm.
have that cup of tea early in the morning, um, talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Some employers, especially post COVID, offer, mental wellness.
Mm-hmm.
Take advantage of it. There's no shame in that. Do not feel guilty about that. Read a book, listen to a podcast, but there's
Mm-hmm.
numerous resources
Right.
and they're all free. I mean, people have no problem spending $8 on a cup of coffee, but like, oh, I can't afford this, I can't afford that. That's not true. There's so many free resources that are so valuable and so effective. Seek those out because your
Mm-hmm.
mental health is so important for all of it, not just for your kids, not just for your firm, your business. How about for you?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need to be mentally strong. You need to be mentally fit to, exist in this society. So get help and take care of your mental health.
Mm.
I have like
Yeah.
80 other things I could talk to you about when you
Right. We'll have to bring you back again.
but those are
Oh,
those are key.
beautiful. And I just want to reiterate something that you said that I want moms to take away as well is make it a point as you're working. You mentioned about getting 2 activities that you're going to attend with your child in the semester and to be present when you go, whether it's a Christmas show, whether it's a book fair. Make sure that you do put in your calendar 2 activities that you're going to do each semester with your child. The reason for that is your child is the one that's going to remember those memories. And what you create with your child that's going to go into the next generation when they have their children. Because if you become that available mom as you're working, they too will find ways to become available for their own children. So
Absolutely. I couldn't
that is
agree
huge.
more. Yeah.
All right.
Great.
So thank you, everybody, for listening to the podcast, and stay tuned for the next episode.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It was a pleasure being on here.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast. If you haven't already, please hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss any new episodes. It would also mean the world to me if you're able to take a moment and rate and review my podcast on how it was helpful to you. Also, please connect with me on my social media platforms. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next episode.